How I can never go live on my computer. So we are here, we live. Today we're talking about civilization. I've been spending all day talking about civilization, so I might as well just pull that up. Hold on. Let's wait till some folks get in here. Yeah, here we go. I'm trying to. All right. Might take some time. There's some folks come in first. Civilization is not a metaphorical civilization, a living cosmology, an organism of meaning, a dissertation, a YouTube video that'll become about of discussions. Civilization itself will be repeated and appreciated. Now, why does this question matter? Because civilization is not collapsing accidentally. It is collapsing ontologically. So what does that mean? That means the decay of civilization, it's not by chance, but rather it's a structure of nature, of existence. But that begs the question. For example, right now, kids, people in society don't know what life is, don't know what meaning is, don't even know what civilization really is. They have technology, they have their phones, but they don't really know what they're doing. Now, this entire workflow, which will be turned to an actual YouTube video, as you guys know, we're going live to get the whole raw footages first, is an attempt for us to remember what civilization really is, you know. And we'll wait for a bit, see if anybody comes check it in. What time is? Might be in the morning, back in the middle, in different parts of the world. But as we know, we're back here having some good time talking about going live. We've been going live here and there, going live quite a few. So y'all have some good time. I appreciate y'all. Now, civilization as life. Civilization is not a metaphorical life itself. It is life. It's like a living organism. You know, it's like a living organism that has its own ecosystem. It has its own energy field. That's what civilization really is. If you really think about what civilization is, there's a life cycle to a civilization, and there's an identity to that civilization. And there are various cells within that function that shapes a civilization. But then these workers, well, of that civilization are rather composed of human beings, not reducible to biology itself, you know. And these human beings are like archetypes within these civilizations that function, that has these different roles. For example, priests, prophets, and poets that defines the civilization, you know. And cosmology interpretations, they're cosmologic interpreters regarding civilizations. And that aspect really put together a civilization. A civilization survived through functional human roles, archetypical pillars of civilization: kings, organizers, artists, craftsmen, warrior, protectors, thinkers, historians, and comparable. So exactly, if you think about it, civilization is this thing that exists, that we all believe it exists, and it actually does exist, but we can't really see it, but we live it. We see it, we don't feel it. We see its writing, we see its view on cosmology, that means on the universe and how it interprets existence. We see all of that, and also we see the cycle of civilization, as you can see maybe through ancient China. There'll be dynasty, the dynastic periods, and then there will be different in ancient Egypt. There'll be different. You see, there's ancient Egyptian dynasties, as we can see throughout the functions, and then how they talk about in world mythology of how gods really came to be, and how it defines an opening of a group of people, and eventually it splits itself out and it becomes an identity, and then people start to live in it. There are functional people that lives in this place and that functions as civilizations. So that's what I want to talk about, man. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Love to watch Avengers with all of you guys. Love to watch all the shows. Was just thinking about watching some movies earlier, man. I appreciate y'all. Anyways. So civilization as an organism, there are internal archetypes, right? For example, there are priests, there are prophets, there are poets who have that divine spark within them that directly takes inspiration and information from the divine source that cannot be named, the one that can never be named. And then these people try to name that by bounding space-time through inscriptions of language. And that language itself defines a space and time, just like me speaking this to you. I'm trying to bring it into a world of stories and indeed, that's right. So therefore, that what cannot be named will become named, and once that become named, as I'm speaking English right now to you, it becomes a worldview that we shape, and there's colors into it, and that story itself takes on various form through different avatars of human beings that functions whether through positions in society, right? The archetypical pillars that we talked about, or rather through an individual, like Jesus, for example, like Prophet Muhammad, like the Buddha, like Confucius, that exists spontaneously across history, that showcases pinpoints, Obviously, the Greek civilization is something that we're all familiar and very fond of. We got Socrates, we got Plato, and we got all the playwrights. Now I want to focus on today is the civilizational aspect as a cosmological commitment. You know, every civilization, to its functional point, is a belief about existence. It answers some fundamental questions to shape a civilization: is what is the universe, what is life, what is order, and what is supposed to be sacred or protected. Civilization in this case is a shared interpretation of reality itself. Now, there's different aspects of the civilizational points. For example, how you define the universe shapes entire civilization. And that part, it can show throughout various history points, whether it be ancient Egypt, whether it be all ancient civilization, the Sinaitic civilization, the Hellenistic civilization, the Western modern civilization, the Indus civilization. These different civilizations, Islamic civilization, the Indic civilization, these different points that shapes the belief, you know, and it almost like it creates its own universe. It creates its own universe, and then it kind of like spawns itself up, came to being, and it shows itself through various dimensions that it inhibits. Just like something that almost we made up. We talk about, it's something that's subjective, at the same time it's objective. Why is that the case? Because it actually exists, like we're all living in it, we're speaking its actual language, but at the same time you cannot really draw it out, it's bordered, unless you have a true understanding of various subjects. It has to, sometimes it's coherent with nature, sometimes it becomes a construct reality that arbitrarily resolves around itself. So what civilizational, if we take a step back and we see what a civilization is, it becomes some fundamental points. Its views on cosmology, on ontology, and on existence and why we're existing, right? And it has an ending to it. I forgot that word, to be honest. It explains why we're here, what we're doing, through its, and it has a specific code of languages that captures space time uniquely. Whether it's with the Sino scriptures, with the Han characters, that specifically becomes kind of like a iconography, a very visual language, a very visual what's that word? Visual character, visual language that can be showcased, whether it be with English, with the Latin alphabets, whether it's alphabetical, or whether it's rather with very visual. So these two kind of like simultaneously they play its own path. Like the left brain and right brain going through and going about it. In essence itself, it tried to put order into what seems to be chaos, but rather there is a little definition within that chaotic nature that slowly and slowly and slowly, then we find that nature in it, like with the Fibonacci sequences that we see without, that with the various spinning cycle. I don't know if you guys watch JoJo, but like Steel Ball Run's about to come out. I just saw the trailer, and it's all has to do with that spin. It has to do with that spinning energy to it, and itself, it's not civilization does not arises out of necessity, or does it arises out of accidentalism? It rather it's faith. It's an effort a fatalistic destiny that is bounded by the incorporation of space-time. What does that mean? That means that no matter when and where it happens, it just happened at a stage of existence of human nature. It's a group of people. It's an identity that exists, and that identity that exists within becomes a stage of existence. It's like the hermetic law talks about. The hermetic logic talks about, as above so below. So there are repeating patterns that we can see throughout the universe, whether it be Fibonacci, whether it be various cycles or reoccurrences that we can see throughout nature on a macro level and a micro level, as we're observing right now with quantum physics. But then there comes the duality aspect. When we get to quantum physics, we'll see the particle. When it comes to duality of light, the particle and a wave, that entire existence is coherent with the ancient scriptures that everybody has been talking about for thousands of years across various civilizations, across the prophets. Now, our goal obviously is to use that power and to manifest it within ourselves and have the ability to gather power so we can function in society and we can acquire things that we desire. But then sometimes we don't know what we really desire. Here are the things, we're bounded by materialistic lust and various aspects. So it takes time for us to balance and for us to find truth, for us to come together and to really realize what we truly want. And back to today's topic, of civilizational aspects. Civilization itself, what we talked about, it's ontological existence and it's through its cosmology. How they define the universe. What is the universe? Why are we here in the universe? What does it mean? What are we existing for? It's rather a linguistic perspective, whether through poets, right, through epics that we can see, whether it be the Hindu scripture, the Sanskrit scriptures that it comes from. It has its own writing system to it. It has its own unique writing system to it. Whether it be the Latin alphabets. That's why you see the Western civilization being coherent, because it was unified in a way with the alphabet. Whether it be whatever language it is, it became unified under a specific code of languages. And this languages it has its own beneficiaries and it also has its own limitations. And that is not really shown unless we have the ability to really see beyond the scope and compare between two civilizations, which we will find later on through our discussions. We'll compare various civilizations, for example, the Western civilization that really came from the Greco-Roman world with the Hellenistic civilization and how that came to being, and also talk about the Islamic civilization, the Sinaitic civilization, and the Indic civilization. Now, we focus here mostly on the Sinaitic civilizations, and we talk about the different societies and the states that arise from within these structures, just like in ancient Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, and in ancient India and ancient China. These the warring states that keep going about it, and eventually, people come and unify a certain region. And then somebody else will come in and unify a certain region, and there's a decadence of empire, a decadence, decay, and the cycle of civilization. And our key point here is not discussed too heavily on the societal and the historical evolution of that aspect, but to find what really retains itself and maintains, which is the civilizational aspect. And that could be with arts, that could be with technology, that could really be, but then essentially it comes down to these two key points. It's how you view the universe. Now, essentially, to its essence core, it's the same. It's that one point, that one point of that divine connection with the universe that emerges with nature itself. The ancient Taoists call it the emergence of the Tao, right? But no matter what name you call it, it's that oneness with nature, with the universe, that really allows yourself to really become understanding of what really to be or not to be is, in that sense, right? Like language and poetry, we use a way to really inscribe ourselves and to connect ourselves within these consciousness. Like you might feel like I'm talking out of my ass, but at the same time, I'm trying to give you a clear picture of this entire existence and its aspect of civilization. So I really appreciate everybody for joining me so far. We just started these live sessions. I know we had some great podcasts back last year when I was still in university, but now we out here, we're trying to provide some value to the real world. And I really appreciate everybody who's been joining me. These things will be much more consistent, and we'll have actually elaborated, edited YouTube videos for us as well. So these key points really will become more coherent. So I really appreciate everybody for joining in at such an early stage. It is my honor to have you guys. With that being said, after we have talked about the cosmological aspect of civilization, the ontological aspect of civilization, and its destiny of civilization. And that's all bounded by space and time in a universe construct. And then therefore, but then you guys to see what begets the universe, right? That's the question of spirituality, of metaphysics, will be something that we talk about more in depth on another subject. Whereas today we really talk about what civilization really functions as an organism, and it functions as an identity. It functions as like a being that exists on its own, and that existence itself is rather identical, and that identity can be passed on, can be merged, or can be consumed. You know, it can be it can be changed, it can be maintained. But what rather it is that these fundamental element of a belief of these three things we talked about, that is language, that is language based on the foundation of the existence. So these are the fundamental fabrics of our society, of our existence of society. Like society will really collapse if these things become questioned by the masses. And that's why nobody and that's people were taught in a way back in ancient Greece or ancient China. Although only the very wealthy were able to relearn these independent thought, but the ability to really interact and question and to be together with the universe, it's something that we have been talking about. It's something that's the traditions that must be maintained, right? Whether through academia, whether through artistship or craftsmanship or artistry, which is something that we talk about, like what really defines and yard age has a hard place in your care, and you will. Okay, cool, man. I have no idea what that means, bro. We're gonna keep going. These are beautiful things. And so essentially what we talked about so far with civilizational aspects are the key points. And so far so good. Let's keep going. And we talked about mathematics. you know we talked about science, and we talk about dual truth. Like, for example, if, as you guys talk about, great point you guys mentioned, with morality, with emotional, but that comes to a scale of spectrum that requires intelligence for people to comprehend. But then there's something that can be devoided upon subjective experiences that can be objective, which is sacred geometry that Plato proposes, right? The idea of mathematics. Mathematics itself, it is still a universal code, because mathematics still shapes our physical worldview, even to an extent, right? Even to the quantum realm. And interpretation in this case then becomes the fundamental definition of a civilization, you know, and it has a degree of spectrum to it. It has the metaphysical, it has a spiritual approach, it has a philosophical approach, it has a scientific approach, which really is a mathematical and logical approach, and it has its own materialistic representation, manifestation within that. You know, like science in this case really clarifies structure, but it does not guarantee meaning in essence. Laws of symbolic interpretation becomes at least to nihilism of technocratic emptiness, as maybe we can hint on, throughout history, that we can be showcased, whether it be the Bronze Age, whether it be the Gilded Age, right? Whether it be the Colonial Age, the over New Age. There are different ages of periods of mankind that showcases this design and growth. Now, let's take a step back, because we're talking about very fundamental issues here that are very fundamentally broad, right? In the case of the continuity and the immersion and the identity of civilization, it is not rather by ethnicity or by state. Ethnicity, in this case, become biological, and the state itself is political. Civilization, then, is a historical and cosmological fact that is ingrained in our heads, that showcases the meaning between what it means to really be human to a degree, you know, and the separation between societies, states, and even nations that are both incorporated in a civilization can be shown today in modern day Europe or Western civilization, or the Sinic civilizations, or the Indic civilizations, Islamic civilizations, various states that evolve but functions within the same civilization. And itself can really merge, it can absorb, it can create symbiosis relationship, that can be collaborative. And it really depends on, it's like that's why I really thought thinking of it as an organism, because in a way it is very just like an organism. It can be healthy, it can go through periods of decay, it can experience death, it can birth, it can be rebirth in this case, which is super awesome, in my opinion. And then afterwards, it can came into be something new. But then also it could be transformed, rejuvenated back to its youth, as we can see through the ancient China for a lot of example, uh, with Greco-Roman, for example, right? Athens, first with after the collapse of the Bronze Age, Athens, Sparta, and then eventually that will become Macedonia will come in, and then in that case Rome will don't come in. Carthage will then come in first, and then Rome will come in, and eventually you see this pile getting bigger and bigger into a uh, unified identity still, that in this case can be bounded by ethnicity. And ethnicity itself, it's not a representation of a single civilization. Ethnicity being biological and the state being political. you know so despite of political separations, the continuity of civilization has to be defined and purely defined upon its understanding of its uh, its understanding of its own existence. You know, so that's that. That being said, we talk about the evolution and the dilution of civilization, but then there's a measurement. There's an objective measurement fact that can be defined in two ways. It's its artistic value in its art, literature, wisdom, and craftsmanship. The artistic depth that a civilization showcases with its best work, and as well as technology. But personally, I would say that technology comes after artistry. Artistry is really subjective. It is the meaning of suffering, in, or it's the meaning of emotions that are being ingrained and imprinted as the most subjective most subjective beauty, which makes that itself sacred. And if that is being protected and rather cherished, that really showcases the state of mind of a civilization at this point, where rather technology is technocratic improvement can be seen as efficiency without meaning. It can have its own dilution. It can lose its depth, and it can lose its out soul. So I would say that art really comes first, and then technology really comes second. Like technology will kind of like impact pass forward art, and art will kind of like move. Art was like the number one. It's more feminine, right? It has that feminine energy to it. It's more of it's a subjective feeling, and then eventually that more of like an technology, which is more of like the containment, the manipulation, the using of what it's supposed to be sacred into order. That will really kind of replaces art and create more order in the upfront, but then that also will bound the ceiling of a certain era, you know, within artistry. But then art kind of takes, but then that itself is art, because that's the manipulational aspect of art, whereas there is an also expressional aspect of art. And these two art kind of like create these two aspect of art showcases the life cycle and current timeline of a certain civilizational dynasty, you know, as you can showcase throughout ancient China. Ancient China has these dynastic periods that, or even with ancient Egypt, that we can see and we can really see what really happened. And also with Persia too, right? Persia went through various dynasties. Islam went through various dynasties. The Western civilization being Hellenistic and Judeo-Hellenistic has gone through a lot of periods as well. These are key points that'll be very interesting to really touch on simultaneously for different people at different time as well. Again, I want to say that we're gonna have these YouTube videos very elaborately made. I'm just trying to, I'm brainstorming. I'm going live, sharing this with you guys, sharing the rise material with you guys right now. I think seeing what you guys prefer. This is, I think, the free flowing aspect might be interesting. Been doing this, we just started our live session really last week, So I really appreciate everyone for tuning in. You know, everybody who viewed our live videos at this period of our time means a lot to us, and we're really grateful, really appreciative, and hopefully we'll see you guys more in the future. And let me know what type of subjects you want us to talk about, and we'll bring in some more guests like we have so with our podcast. And I appreciate y'all. You know, I really appreciate y'all. Y'all the best. And this is a place where we really get deep. We get deep. We think about it. And then we bring on every expert you guys really want. I guess for me to talk about these things with more weight, I like to an authority stamp on these situation could also work better. You that being said, a couple more points I want to talk about with civilization before we wrap this up is the idea of empire that emerges within civilization. Kind of touched upon that when it comes to society begets various state, and state will create nations, will become unified, and there'll be nations that existence, and then eventually become an empire. And then the measurement of that empire, I think I've showcased that is through art and technology, whereas art begets itself as the primary because of its feminine aspect and its ability to hope to be open and to be embraced through the subjective beauty that showcases to the viewer or to the experiencer, right? It's to be experienced, in which then art itself becomes more manipulative through technology when order is required, because all these things requires creativity, and that creative energy is indeed the output that takes civilization forward. But then that definition has to be really defined very properly, because that is very interesting. It has to be defined properly. It has to be defined with tender and care, because sometimes we have to be sure of our identity. For example, what is identity? Identity itself, it's a very interesting term to talk about, right? Identity. Who are you? Who am I? Why do you matter? Why do I matter? What is that? It has its own spectrum. It has its own spectrum to it. It has its own leveling layer to it. And to truly understand that, you'll be really strong, powerful. You be. I would guarantee you abundance. And that abundance, and through manifestation, will come with the things you desire. That's all I can say, right? That's why it's a dangerous thing, because what do you really desire? What do you really desire? And so, yeah, so power in this case, we talk about power, right? And power then is power within a civilization. It's given by its own cosmology. It's given in a way of its interpretation of the spiritual world. The spiritual world is our brain and our soul are antennas that essentially receive these messages, and the ability to really translate these messages to its maximum, to generate maximized output. It's through its idea of it's through giving these people these experiences. Fundamental aspect being language. Like we talked about the cosmology aspect of language itself. We talked about the cosmology that shapes a civilization, that defines the stories, the beginning, the genesis of the civilization. And talk about its language, right? How language encodes all that into a world on its own, and it gives the experiencer, the one who's listening, that world that one shapes and to experience simultaneously with, to eventually to a group of people, to a nation of people, to a state of people, right? Its ability to function coherent.